Nobody plans to see death coming, nobody asks to be in the wrong place at the exact wrong second, but Lily Carter was there anyway, standing in that cold underground parking garage at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, holding her phone like it could somehow protect her from what was about to go down. She wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't supposed to leave the fundraiser early, wasn't supposed to take the back exit because the front was crawling with photographers who'd been hounding her all week. But she did, and now she was about to witness something that would turn her entire world into a ticking bomb. The concrete walls around her smelled like oil and rain, the fluorescent lights above flickering like they knew something terrible was coming, and then she heard it, footsteps echoing, voices low and sharp, the kind of voices that don't belong to people who follow rules. She should have turned around right then, should have walked back inside, but curiosity or fate or something darker kept her frozen behind that concrete pillar, watching as three men in dark suits dragged something heavy toward a black SUV, and that's when she saw his face, the man being dragged, blood streaming from his temple, eyes wide open but seeing nothing, already gone. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart slamming against her ribs like it wanted to escape her chest, and she pressed herself harder against that pillar, praying they wouldn't hear the sound of her terror. One of the men, tall with slicked back hair and a scar running down his jaw, stopped suddenly, his head tilting like a predator sensing prey, and for one horrifying second she thought he saw her, thought it was over, but then his phone rang and he turned away, barking orders in Italian while the others shoved the body into the trunk and slammed it shut. She didn't breathe until they drove away, didn't move until the sound of the engine faded into the California night, and even then her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, shaking so hard she had to lean against the wall just to stay upright. She'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see, something that was meant to stay buried in the dark corners of Los Angeles where power and violence danced together like old lovers, and now she was marked, whether she knew it yet or not. If you've ever seen something dangerous, something you wish you could unsee, stay close because what comes next doesn't let you look away. And listen, if this opening already hit you with that cold feeling in your chest, that feeling you get when you know something's wrong but you can't look away, then do me a quick favor, nothing that will break the vibe. Drop a like here. Just a little tap. Helps this story reach more people who know exactly what it's like to witness something they should never have seen. And if you enjoy stories that pull you into the darkness, that make you feel the heavy California air at 3 in the morning, that leave you waiting for the next step because you know things are about to get worse, then subscribe to the channel right now. Your support keeps this whole thing breathing. Every like, every subscription, that's what allows us to continue bringing you stories that hit you like this, stories that make your heart race out of nowhere. Now breathe, because what comes next doesn't ease the pain. Not even a little. Lily didn't sleep that night, couldn't close her eyes without seeing that man's face staring into nothing, couldn't stop her hands from shaking every time she remembered the sound of the trunk slamming shut like a coffin being sealed. She sat in her bedroom at the presidential residence, the one with the bulletproof windows and Secret Service agents stationed outside her door, and realized for the first time in her life that all that protection meant absolutely nothing if the threat came from a world her father's security detail didn't even know existed. She grabbed her phone at 3 in the morning, fingers hovering over her dad's contact, ready to call him, ready to tell him everything, but then she stopped because what exactly would she say, that she snuck out of a fundraiser and witnessed what looked like a mob hit in a parking garage, that she could identify the men, that she was pretty sure one of them had looked right at her. Her father was the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the country, but even he couldn't protect her from ghosts, from shadows, from men who made people disappear in the middle of the night and left no trace behind. So she didn't call him, didn't tell anyone, just sat there in the dark convincing herself that maybe she'd imagined it, maybe the stress of being the president's daughter had finally gotten to her, maybe it was just some random thing that had nothing to do with her. But deep down she knew better, knew that the universe doesn't put you in front of something that brutal by accident, knew that witnesses don't just walk away clean. The next morning she went through the motions, smiled for the cameras at breakfast, nodded through her security briefing, pretended everything was normal while her mind replayed that scene over and over like a horror movie stuck on repeat. Her lead Secret Service agent Martinez asked if she was feeling okay, said she looked pale, and she just laughed it off, blamed it on bad sleep, on stress, on anything except the truth. But Martinez had been protecting her for 3 years, knew her tells, knew when something was off, and she could see the concern in his eyes even as he nodded and stepped back. That afternoon she had a campaign event in downtown LA, some ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center, and she stood there in her designer dress and perfect smile while her father gave his speech about hope and progress and the American dream, and all she could think about was how fragile all of it was, how easily it could all come crashing down if the wrong people found out what she'd seen. She noticed him during the photo op, standing at the back of the crowd, Tall and broad-shouldered in an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the danger underneath, dark hair swept back, sharp jawline, eyes like black ice scanning the crowd with the kind of focus that made her stomach drop. He wasn't looking at the president, wasn't looking at the politicians or the press, he was looking at her, directly at her, and she knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't random, that he was connected to what she'd seen, that somehow they already knew. She tried to keep her composure, tried to keep smiling, but her hands went cold and her breathing got shallow and she must have faltered because her father glanced at her mid-sentence, concern flashing across his face before he recovered and finished his speech. The man in the back didn't move, didn't smile, just watched her with an intensity that felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, and then just before her security detail started moving her toward the car, he turned and disappeared into the crowd like smoke. That night she got a text from an unknown number, no words, just a photo, and when she opened it her blood turned to ice because it was her, standing behind that pillar in the parking garage, frozen in the moment right before she saw the body, proof that they knew exactly where she'd been, exactly what she'd witnessed, exactly how exposed she really was. There's something about being watched by people who kill without hesitation that changes you, and Lily was about to learn just how much. Lily stared at that photo for hours, zoomed in on every detail, looking for clues about who sent it, how they got it, what they wanted, but all she found was her own terrified face staring back at her from a screen that suddenly felt like a weapon. She should have gone straight to her security detail, should have told Martinez everything right then, but something stopped her, some instinct that whispered if she brought the Secret Service into this she'd be starting a war she couldn't control, one that might end with more bodies and more trunks and her father's presidency destroyed in the crossfire. So she deleted the photo, cleared her cache, threw her phone across the room like that would somehow erase what she'd seen, and sat on the edge of her bed trying to figure out how a 23-year-old political science graduate who'd spent her whole life behind security barriers and diplomatic smiles had ended up in the crosshairs of what was clearly the Los Angeles mafia. She'd grown up in this world, knew how power worked, knew that her father had enemies, rivals, people who'd love nothing more than to see him fall, but this felt different, felt personal, felt like she'd stumbled into something way bigger than just politics. The man she'd seen being dragged, the one with blood on his face and death in his eyes, who was he, what had he done to deserve that kind of end, and more importantly, why did it happen in a parking garage 2 floors below a fundraiser attended by half the city's elite? The next day she did something stupid, something reckless, something that would have given her security detail a collective heart attack if they'd known. She started digging. She used her laptop, not her phone, connected through a VPN she'd set up in college when she was dating that hacktivist kid her father hated, and started searching for murders in LA, unsolved cases, missing persons, anything that might connect to what she'd witnessed. She found nothing at first, just the usual crime statistics and news reports, but then she stumbled across a blog run by some true crime-obsessed journalist who covered organized crime in California, and there buried in a post from 3 days ago was a mention of a missing city councilman named Marcus Webb, last seen leaving a political fundraiser in downtown LA, his car found abandoned near the convention center, no body, no leads, no answers. The photo on the article made her stomach lurch because that was him, that was the face she'd seen, the man being dragged across concrete with his life already gone, and suddenly this wasn't just some random hit, this was a city official, someone connected to her father's administration, someone whose disappearance would eventually trigger a massive investigation. She slammed her laptop shut, heart racing, because now she understood she wasn't just a witness to a murder, she was a witness to a political assassination, and whoever was behind it would do absolutely anything to make sure she never told what she saw. That night she couldn't stay in the residence, couldn't sit in that perfect bedroom with its perfect security knowing that somewhere out there people were deciding what to do about her. So she told Martinez she needed air, needed to clear her head, and convinced him to let her walk the gardens with just 2 agents trailing at a distance. The California night was cool and clear, stars barely visible through the LA light pollution, and she walked the stone paths trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to figure out her next move. That's when she saw him again, the man from the crowd, standing just beyond the fence line in the shadows where the security lights didn't quite reach. And this time he wasn't just watching, he was waiting. Her agents hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on the perimeter closer to her, and for a moment she considered screaming, considered running, considered doing anything except what she actually did, which was walk closer to the fence, close enough to see his face clearly in the moonlight. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe early 30s, with sharp features that would have been handsome if they weren't so cold, and when he spoke his voice was low and smooth like expensive whiskey, tinged with an accent that sounded East Coast, maybe New York or Jersey, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd grown up learning how to hurt people professionally. "Lily Carter," he said, not a question, just a statement, her name sounding dangerous in his mouth. You've got yourself into quite a situation, haven't you? She should have called for her agents right then, should have backed away, but instead she stood there frozen, staring at this man who clearly worked for people who killed city councilmen and disposed of bodies like it was just another Tuesday. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, hating how weak her voice sounded, how scared. He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes, didn't soften the lethal edge that surrounded him like cologne. "Name's Marco Salvatore, and I work for someone who's very interested in having a conversation with you. Someone who'd really prefer if you kept that pretty mouth shut about what you saw the other night." The way he said it, casual and calm, made it so much worse than if he'd threatened her outright, because the implication was clear: they could get to her anytime they wanted, security detail or not, presidential residence or not. "And if I don't?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her voice despite the terror coursing through her veins. Marco's smile widened just a fraction, something predatory flickering behind those dark eyes. "Then you're gonna find out real quick that being the president's daughter doesn't make you bulletproof, just makes your funeral more inconvenient for everyone involved. Stay close, because the moment she made her choice, everything that came before became just the prologue to something way darker." Marco disappeared into the shadows before her agents even knew he'd been there, melting into the California night like he'd never existed at all, and Lily stood frozen at that fence line, feeling like the ground had just opened up beneath her feet and swallowed everything she thought she knew about safety and power and protection. She walked back to the residence on autopilot, nodding at Martinez when he asked if she was okay, lying straight to his face with a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else, and the whole time all she could think about was Marco Salvatore's voice telling her she wasn't bulletproof, that her father's position meant nothing to people who operated outside the law, outside consequences, outside everything her world was built on. She locked herself in her room and pulled out her laptop again, searching for Marco's name, finding almost nothing except a few mentions in sealed court documents and a blurry photo from a surveillance camera outside a restaurant in Little Italy, but even that little bit was enough to confirm what she already suspected. He was connected to the Giordano family, one of the oldest and most powerful crime organizations on the West Coast, the kind of people who'd been running operations since Prohibition and had politicians and judges and police chiefs in their pockets like loose change. She thought about her father, about President James Carter sleeping soundly 2 floors below her, completely unaware that his daughter had witnessed a mob hit and was now being threatened by a made man with dead eyes and expensive suits. He'd spent his entire career fighting corruption, building his platform on transparency and justice and cleaning up the system, and here she was sitting on information that could either validate everything he stood for or destroy him completely depending on how it came out. Because that's what Marco and his people were counting on, weren't they? That she'd understand the math, that exposing what she saw would mean exposing how a city councilman ended up dead after attending a presidential fundraiser, would mean investigations and scandals and questions about who knew what and when, would mean her father's enemies circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. They were betting she'd choose protection over truth, silence over justice, that she'd be just another privileged kid who looked the other way when things got messy, and the worst part was they might be right. The next morning she went through her routine like a ghost, barely tasting her breakfast, barely hearing the morning briefing about her schedule, barely registering Martinez's concerned looks as they drove to her volunteer shift at a women's shelter in East LA. She'd started working there during her father's campaign, back when she actually believed she could make a difference, back before she understood how deep the rot went, how much of the city was controlled by people like the Giordanos, people who saw human beings as assets or liabilities, nothing in between. The shelter director, Mrs. Chin, hugged her when she arrived, commented that she looked tired, suggested maybe she was pushing herself too hard with all the campaign appearances and public events, and Lily just nodded and smiled and lied some more because that's what her life had become now, an endless stream of lies stacked on top of secrets stacked on top of fear. She spent 2 hours helping sort donations and talking to women who'd escaped abusive relationships, listening to their stories about violence and terror and feeling like a fraud because at least they'd gotten out, at least they'd found the courage to run. And what was she doing, sitting on evidence of a murder because she was too scared to speak up, too worried about the political fallout, too concerned about her own skin? She was folding donated clothes in the back room when her phone buzzed, another text from that unknown number, and this time it wasn't a photo, it was an address in Boyle Heights and a time, 9 p.m. tonight, nothing else, just the clear implication that she was expected to show up. Every rational part of her brain screamed that going was insane, that meeting with mobsters in a warehouse district at night was the kind of decision that ended with bodies in dumpsters and grieving families on the news, but she also knew that ignoring the message wasn't an option, that these people had already proven they could reach her anytime they wanted, that running would just make things worse. So she spent the rest of the day planning, figuring out how to ditch her security detail, how to get across the city without being tracked, how to walk into a trap with her eyes open and somehow walk back out alive. She thought about telling someone, maybe not her father but someone, maybe her best friend Ashley who'd been covering for her sneaking out since high school, but then she realized that anyone she told would either try to stop her or become complicit in whatever happened next, and she couldn't put that on anyone else, couldn't drag them into the darkness that was swallowing her whole. At 8:30 that night she told Martinez she was going to bed early, had a headache, needed rest, and she could see he didn't quite believe her but he nodded anyway because what else could he do, lock her in her room like a prisoner. She waited until she heard the security shift change at 9, then slipped out through the service entrance she'd been using since she was 16, the one that led through the kitchen and past the maintenance area where the cameras had blind spots if you knew exactly where to stand. She'd called an Uber using a burner app, paid cash to a college kid who didn't ask questions when she climbed into his beat-up Honda wearing a hoodie and sunglasses at night, and tried not to think about how insane this was as they drove east through LA traffic toward an address that might be the last place she'd ever see. Boyle Heights at night was a different world from the one she lived in, all graffitied walls and chain-link fences and groups of guys hanging on corners eyeing her Uber like they were deciding whether it was worth the trouble, and she felt her privilege like a weight around her neck because she could leave this neighborhood anytime she wanted but the people who lived here didn't have that option, were stuck in a system that had forgotten them while people like her father gave speeches about hope and change from behind bulletproof glass. The address led to an old textile factory that had been abandoned for decades, windows broken, walls covered in layers of spray paint, the kind of place where bad things happened and nobody looked too close. The Uber driver asked if she was sure this was right, said it didn't look safe, and she almost laughed because nothing about this was safe, nothing about her life had been safe since she stood behind that pillar and watched a man die. She paid him extra to wait, knowing he wouldn't, knowing she'd be lucky to find any ride out of this neighborhood at night, and walked toward the rusted metal door that hung half open like a mouth waiting to swallow her. Inside the factory was dark except for a single light source deeper in, and she followed it on shaking legs, her phone clutched in one hand like it could somehow save her, past machinery that looked like sleeping monsters and offices with doors hanging off hinges and finally into a large open space where Marco Salvatore stood waiting, not alone this time but flanked by two other men who looked like they bench-pressed cars for fun. "Smart girl," Marco said, sounding genuinely impressed, "actually showing up. Most people in your position would have run to daddy by now." She wanted to say something brave, something defiant, but her voice wouldn't work right so she just stood there trying not to shake visibly while he walked closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "My boss wants to meet you," he continued, gesturing toward a door at the back of the space. "Wants to explain the situation personally, make sure we're all on the same page about how this plays out." Every instinct screamed at her to run but her legs carried her forward anyway, through that door and into a smaller room that had been set up like some kind of office, desk and chairs and even art on the walls, surreal in its normalcy given where it was located. And sitting behind that desk, leaning back in a leather chair like he owned not just this room but the entire city, was a man she'd seen before at fundraisers and galas and political dinners, always in the background, always smiling, always shaking hands with people who should have known better. Vincent Giordano looked nothing like a mob boss, looked instead like someone's favorite uncle, silver-haired and warm-eyed with laugh lines around his mouth and expensive but understated clothes, the kind of man who probably donated to charities and kissed babies and went to church every Sunday. But Lily had learned enough about power to know that the most dangerous people rarely looked the part, that real predators didn't need to advertise their teeth. "Miss Carter," he said, standing and extending his hand like they were meeting at a cocktail party instead of an abandoned factory at night, "thank you for coming. I know this must be terrifying for you and I apologize for the theatrics, but discretion is important in my line of work." She didn't shake his hand, couldn't make herself touch him, and he withdrew it with a small knowing smile that made her skin crawl. "You saw something unfortunate the other night," he continued, sitting back down and gesturing for her to take the chair opposite him, "something that was handled poorly by my associates, and now we find ourselves in a complicated position." She finally found her voice, forced it past the fear clogging her throat. "You killed Marcus Webb." It wasn't a question but Vincent nodded anyway, like she'd just commented on the weather, completely casual about admitting to murder. "Marcus made some very poor decisions," he said, "got greedy, thought he could skim from operations we'd entrusted him with, thought his position protected him. It didn't. But that's not really your concern, is it? Your concern is what happens now that you know what happened, now that you're connected to something you never asked to be part of." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, suddenly looking less like an uncle and more like exactly what he was. I've known your father for years, donated to his campaigns, attended his events, supported his policies when they aligned with my interests. He's a good man, believes in justice, in doing the right thing, all those admirable qualities that make him completely predictable. Which is why I know if you tell him what you saw, he'll have no choice but to act, to launch investigations, to turn this into a crusade, and that would be unfortunate for everyone involved, especially you and your family. Are you threatening my father? Lily asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the terror coursing through her. Vincent smiled, something almost paternal in it that made it so much worse. I'm explaining reality, sweetheart. Your father's clean, we've looked, trust me. But everyone around him? His staff, his donors, his political allies? Some of them aren't so clean. Some of them have secrets, connections, deals they'd rather stay buried. You start pulling threads, talking to FBI, making this public, and I promise you the investigation won't stop with Marcus Webb, won't stop with me. It'll unravel everything, expose everyone, and when the dust settles your father won't be president anymore, he'll be a footnote, a tragedy, the man who lost everything because his daughter couldn't keep quiet about something that wasn't her business. He stood, walked around the desk, perched on its edge right in front of her. Or, you could walk out of here tonight, go home, sleep in your comfortable bed and forget you ever saw anything. Marcus Webb becomes another unsolved case, just one more statistic in a city full of them, and you get to keep your life, your father keeps his presidency, and we all move forward. Simple choice, really? But it wasn't simple, nothing about this was simple, because choosing silence meant becoming complicit, meant letting murderers walk free, meant betraying everything her father had taught her about integrity and justice and standing up for what's right. But choosing truth meant destroying him, meant watching his legacy crumble, meant potentially getting her whole family killed by people who clearly had no problem making problems disappear. I need time, she whispered, hating herself for even considering it, to think. Vincent studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 48 hours, he said, then I need an answer. And Lily? Don't do anything stupid in the meantime. Don't go to the police, don't tell your security detail, don't even think about running because I've got people watching you every second, and if I get even a hint that you're not playing ball, this conversation ends very differently for everyone you love. There's another video right here that shows you exactly what Lily decided, and trust me, you're not ready for where this goes next. And before I show you how deep this rabbit hole actually goes, let me ask you something real quick, because after everything Lily just went through, I want to know what you would do in her place. Seriously. No politics, no filters, just instinct. Would you stay quiet to protect your family? Or blow everything wide open and take the hit? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm reading every single one because stories like this aren't just fiction. They reveal who we really are when fear tightens its grip. Tell me your move. Your choice might be the one that decides what I reveal in the next chapter. Lily walked out of that factory feeling like she'd left pieces of herself behind, scattered across the concrete floor with the rust and the shadows and the weight of an impossible choice. Marco drove her back himself this time, didn't say a word the entire ride, just glanced at her occasionally in the rearview mirror like he was measuring how close she was to braking, and she stared out the window at the LA lights blurring past and wondered when exactly her life had turned into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. He dropped her 3 blocks from the residence, far enough that the cameras wouldn't catch his car, close enough that she could slip back in through the service entrance before anyone noticed she'd been gone. And as she walked those 3 blocks in the cool California night, she made a decision that would either save her or destroy everything. She wasn't going to choose between truth and protection, she was going to find a third option, one that Vincent Giordano hadn't considered because men, like him, never expected their victims to fight back smart instead of hard. She spent the next day playing the perfect presidential daughter, smiling through a literacy initiative photo shoot, charming donors at a luncheon, laughing at her father's jokes during a family dinner where he asked about her week and she lied so smoothly it scared her how easy it had become. But the whole time her mind was working, planning, calculating odds and risks and potential outcomes, because she'd realized something important during that meeting with Vincent. He'd made a mistake, he'd told her too much. Revealed that Marcus Webb wasn't just some random councilman but someone who'd been working with the Giordano family, someone who'd been dirty, and if she could prove that connection, prove that Webb's murder was mob-related without revealing she'd witnessed it, then maybe she could force an investigation that wouldn't blow back on her or her father. It was a long shot, borderline impossible, but it was something, and right now something was better than the nothing she'd been drowning in since that night in the parking garage. She reached out to the only person she knew who operated in the gray spaces between legal and illegal, between right and necessary, her ex-boyfriend Danny Chin, who she dated sophomore year at Berkeley and who'd spent the last 3 years working as an investigative journalist specializing in organized crime on the West Coast. They'd ended things badly, him accusing her of slumming it with the activist crowd while living off her father's privilege, her accusing him of being self-righteous and blind to the complexity of real power, but she also knew he was brilliant and fearless and had sources deep in the criminal underworld that even the FBI couldn't touch. She texted him from a burner phone she'd bought at a convenience store using cash, just a simple message, "Need to talk, urgent, somewhere public," and he responded within minutes with an address to a coffee shop in Silver Lake. No questions, no hesitation, like he'd been waiting for her to reach out all this time. They met at noon the next day, and Danny looked exactly the same, messy black hair and sharp eyes behind thick framed glasses, wearing a worn leather jacket and carrying a backpack that probably had enough recording equipment to wire an entire building. He didn't hug her, didn't even smile, just sat down across from her and said, "You look terrified, what happened?" And maybe that's why she dated him in the first place, because he saw through her masks like they were made of glass. She told him everything, kept her voice low and calm while her hands shook around her coffee cup, described the parking garage and Marcus Webb and Marco Salvatore and Vincent Giordano and the impossible choice she'd been given, and Danny listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with every detail until finally she finished and he sat back and ran his hands through his hair and said, "Jesus Christ, Lily, you're in way over your head, you know that, right?" "I know," she whispered, "that's why I need your help. You've been investigating the Giordanos for years, you must have something, some connection between them and Webb, some evidence that could trigger an investigation without me having to come forward as a witness." Danny was quiet for a long moment, staring at his own coffee like it held answers, then finally looked up at her with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "I've got bits and pieces," he said slowly, "financial records that suggest Webb was taking payoffs, testimony from a protected witness who claims the Giordanos owned several city officials, surveillance photos of Webb meeting with known associates. But nothing concrete enough to move on, nothing that would survive the kind of legal scrutiny this would require, especially with someone as connected as Vincent involved." He leaned forward, voice dropping even lower. "What you're asking me to do, it's not just dangerous for you, it's dangerous for everyone, because if we start pulling on this thread and we don't have enough to take the whole organization down, they'll know someone talked, they'll start looking for leaks and people will die, not just us but informants, witnesses, anyone they think might have flipped." But Lily had already thought about that, had already weighed the cost against the alternative, against living the rest of her life knowing she'd chosen silence over justice, knowing that Marcus Webb's murder would go unpunished and the Giordanos would keep operating and more people would die because she'd been too scared to act. "So we make sure we have enough," she said, hearing the steel in her own voice, surprised by it. "We build a case they can't fight, we gather evidence from every angle, and we hand it to someone who can't be bought or intimidated, someone who'll have no choice but to act." Danny studied her like he was seeing her for the first time, like the privileged political daughter he'd dated had transformed into someone harder, someone capable of the kind of calculated risk that kept him up at night. "You're talking about going after one of the most powerful crime families in California," he said, "families that have survived decades of investigations and prosecutions, families that have judges and cops and politicians in their pocket. You really think we can take them down?" "I think we have to try," Lily said, and she meant it, felt it in her bones, this strange certainty that had replaced the fear, "because if we don't, if I just walk away and pretend I didn't see anything, then what's the point of any of it, my father's presidency, all his talk about justice and reform and standing up to corruption? How can I be his daughter and not even try?" Danny smiled then, small and sad but real, and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Okay," he said, "okay, we'll do this, but we do it smart, we do it careful, and the second it feels like they're onto us, we bail, we run, we ghost completely. Deal?" She nodded, feeling something like hope flickering to life in her chest for the first time since that night, fragile and desperate but there. "Deal." Over the next 30 hours they worked like their lives depended on it, which they did, Danny pulling files and making calls to sources while Lily used her access to cross-reference names and dates and events, building a timeline that connected Marcus Webb to the Giordano organization through shell companies and real estate deals and campaign contributions that all pointed to systematic corruption. They found evidence that Webb had been laundering money through city construction projects, awarding contracts to Giordano-owned businesses in exchange for kickbacks, using his position to protect their operations from regulatory scrutiny. It was damning stuff, The kind of evidence that could bury not just Webb but potentially expose the entire network of corruption the Giordano's had built over decades. But it still wasn't enough, wasn't definitive, needed something more to push it over the edge from suspicious to prosecutable. That's when Lily remembered something Vincent had said during their meeting, something about Marcus getting greedy and skimming from operations they'd entrusted him with, and she realized that if Webb had been stealing from the Giordano's, there had to be records somewhere, financial discrepancies, hidden accounts, something that would prove both his corruption and his murder motive. She told Danny and he got this wild look in his eyes, the one he got when his story was coming together, and said he knew someone, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking mob money, someone who might be able to find those records if they pointed her in the right direction. They reached out, explained what they needed without revealing too much, and 12 hours later they had it, evidence of an offshore account in Webb's name containing over $2 million that didn't match his legitimate income, transfers that corresponded with Giordano construction deals, withdrawals that suggested he'd been skimming at least 15% off the top for the past 18 months. It was everything they needed, enough to prove Webb was dirty, enough to establish motive for his disappearance, enough to trigger a federal investigation into the Giordano organization. And as Lily stared at the documents spread across Danny's apartment floor, she felt this weird mix of triumph and terror because they'd actually done it, actually built a case. But now came the hard part, getting it to someone who'd act on it without getting themselves killed in the process. Danny suggested the FBI field office in LA, but Lily knew Vincent probably had people there, knew that going through official channels was how evidence disappeared and witnesses ended up dead. Then she remembered her father's attorney general, Rebecca Santos, a woman who'd built her career prosecuting organized crime in New York, who her father had appointed specifically because she was incorruptible, who Vincent probably couldn't touch even if he wanted to. "We give it to her," Lily said, directly, no intermediaries, no official channels. "We arrange a private meeting, show her everything, and let her decide how to move forward." Danny made the call, used his press credentials to request an interview about criminal justice reform, and somehow, miraculously, they got a meeting scheduled for the next morning at Santos's private residence in Pacific Palisades, early enough that it wouldn't show up on official schedules, private enough that nobody would know it happened unless Santos decided to act. Lily barely slept that night, kept thinking about Vincent's 48-hour deadline that was about to expire, kept imagining Marco showing up at the residence demanding her answer, kept seeing Marcus Webb's dead eyes staring at nothing. But she also felt something new, something that felt almost like power, because for the first time since this nightmare started she wasn't just reacting, wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back, and win or lose at least she'd know she'd tried. They met Attorney General Santos at 7 a.m., handed her everything they'd compiled, watched her face go from skeptical to shocked to grimly determined as she read through the evidence, and when she finally looked up her eyes were hard as steel. "This is extraordinary work," she said, voice quiet but intense. "And if even half of it holds up under scrutiny, we're looking at RICO charges that could dismantle the entire Giordano operation. But I need to know, how did you get this information, where did it come from, because if there's a witness involved we need to bring them into protection immediately." Lily and Danny exchanged glances, and in that moment she made her final choice, the one she should have made from the beginning. "I witnessed Marcus Webb's murder," she said, watching Santos's eyes widen. "I saw who killed him, where it happened, everything. And I have information about direct threats made to me by Vincent Giordano to keep quiet." She pulled out her phone, the one she'd been recording on during her meeting at the factory, the insurance policy she'd created without even realizing it at the time, and played Santos the audio of Vincent admitting to Webb's murder, threatening her family, outlining his entire operation with the casual confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. The room went silent except for Vincent's voice on the recording, and when it finished Santos stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the Pacific Ocean for a long moment before turning back to them. "You understand what this means?" she said, not really a question. "The moment I act on this, your life as you know it is over. You'll be a key witness in the biggest organized crime prosecution California has seen in decades. You'll have targets on your back, you'll need protection, your father's presidency will be impacted. There's no going back from this." Lily thought about her father, about all his ideals and principles and beliefs in justice, about what he'd do if he were in her position, and she knew with absolute certainty that he'd want her to tell the truth, consequences be damned, because that's who he was, that's what he'd spent his entire career fighting for. "I understand," she said, "and I'm ready. No more silence, no more fear, no more letting men like Vincent Giordano operate like they're above the law." Santos nodded, something like admiration flickering across her face, and pulled out her phone. Then we move now, immediately, before they realize what's happening. I'm calling in the FBI task force I've had standing by for months waiting for exactly this kind of break. We'll have Vincent and his entire operation in custody by noon, and you're going into protective custody until this is resolved. Everything happened fast after that, too fast for Lily to process. Agents arriving, statements being taken, her father being notified and showing up looking terrified and proud and furious all at once, pulling her into a hug and whispering, "I'm so sorry you had to go through this alone," while she cried into his shoulder for the first time since she was a little girl. By the time the news broke that afternoon, Vincent Giordano and 17 of his associates including Marco Salvatore were in federal custody, charged with murder, racketeering, corruption, and about 50 other counts, and Lily was in a safe house with armed guards and the weight of being the key witness in the trial of the century settling onto her shoulders like concrete. Now they all know she saw it, and what comes next, the trial, the testimony, the reckoning, it doesn't forgive, but it might just save everyone she loves. The safe house was a ranch-style property in the high desert outside of Palmdale, surrounded by scrub brush and rocks and absolutely nothing else for miles in every direction. The kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear you, which Lily supposed was the point, isolation as protection, emptiness as security. She'd been there for 6 days when the dreams started, not nightmares exactly but something worse, memories replaying with perfect clarity every time she closed her eyes, Marcus Webb's face, Vincent Giordano's casual admission of murder, Marco Salvatore's dead eyes watching her from the shadows, all of it looping endlessly until she'd wake up sweating and shaking and reaching for a phone she wasn't allowed to have anymore. The FBI had assigned her a protection detail of 4 agents who rotated shifts, professional and polite but distant, treating her like a valuable asset rather than a person, and she couldn't blame them because that's what she was now, the star witness whose testimony would either bring down one of California's most powerful crime families or get thrown out on technicalities and leave her exposed and useless and probably dead. Her father visited when he could, flying in on Marine One with a security convoy that turned the empty desert into a temporary military zone, and they'd sit in the safe house kitchen drinking coffee while he asked questions he didn't really want answers to, like, "Were you scared? And why didn't you come to me immediately? And do you understand how much danger you were in?" And she'd answer honestly because lying to him now felt impossible after everything. He looked older every time she saw him, new lines around his eyes, more gray in his hair, the weight of the presidency combined with nearly losing his daughter aging him in fast forward, and she felt guilty about that, about adding to his burden, about dragging him into this nightmare through her own reckless choices. But he never said she'd done the wrong thing, never suggested she should have stayed silent, and during his 3rd visit he told her something that stuck with her long after he left. "I'm proud of you, Lily, prouder than I've ever been because you did what was right even when it was terrifying, even when it would have been so much easier to look away, and that's what integrity actually looks like. Not speeches or policies but standing up when it costs you everything." Attorney General Santos visited too, bringing updates on the case, preparing Lily for what the trial would look like, warning her about the defense strategies that would try to discredit her testimony by painting her as a privileged kid seeking attention or a politically motivated liar trying to help her father's administration. "They're going to come at you hard," Santos said during one session, her voice matter-of-fact but not unkind. "They're going to dig into your past, your relationships, your social media, every mistake you've ever made. They're going to try to make the jury doubt everything about you including your basic character. And the Giordano family lawyers are the best money can buy. They've gotten clients off on murder charges with video evidence, so you need to be prepared for them to twist this into something unrecognizable." Lily listened and nodded and tried not to think about having her entire life dissected in open court, tried not to imagine Marco Salvatore staring at her from the defense table while lawyers called her a liar, tried not to calculate the odds of actually winning this thing versus just making herself a target for nothing. Danny visited once, had to jump through about 15 security hoops to get cleared, and when he finally sat across from her in that bland safe house living room he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since this whole thing broke. "You're all over the news," he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite work. "The president's daughter who took down the mob, they're calling you brave and reckless and stupid and heroic depending on which network you watch." She asked if he was okay, if the Giordanos had made any moves against him for helping her, and his expression went carefully neutral in a way that told her everything she needed to know. "There've been some threats," he admitted finally. "Nothing specific, just my apartment getting broken into with nothing stolen, my car tires slashed, messages from blocked numbers suggesting I should leave town for my health. FBI offered me protection but I turned it down, figured I'd be safer staying visible, staying public, making it clear that anything that happens to me would just add to the case against them." Lily felt sick hearing that, felt the weight of dragging him into danger settling onto her already overloaded conscience. But Danny just shrugged like risking his life was no big deal. "This is what we signed up for," he said. "When we decided to go after them, we knew there'd be consequences, and honestly, knowing that we actually did it, that we built a case strong enough to get them arrested, that makes it worth it whatever happens next." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the arrests, and Lily spent that time preparing with the prosecution team, going over her testimony 100 times, learning how to stay calm under cross-examination, practicing maintaining eye contact with the jury even when defense lawyers were calling her credibility into question. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Jennifer Park who'd cut her teeth prosecuting gang cases in San Diego and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court, the kind of lawyer who could make hostile witnesses cry and get juries to convict on circumstantial evidence alone. "Your testimony is solid," Park told Lily during one of their prep sessions. "You're credible, consistent, and we have the recording to back up the most important parts, but the defense is going to focus on the fact that you waited days to come forward, that you went to a journalist instead of law enforcement, that you snuck out of the presidential residence without your security detail to meet with alleged criminals. They're going to paint you as reckless and untrustworthy, and we need to get ahead of that, need to give the jury a narrative that explains your choices in a sympathetic way." So they crafted a story, not lies exactly but strategic framing, Lily as the terrified young woman who'd witnessed something horrific and was trying to protect her family, who'd reached out to the one person she trusted to help her navigate an impossible situation, who'd gathered evidence before coming forward because she knew accusations against the Giordanos would need to be ironclad or they'd be dismissed. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived like an execution date, Lily waking up in that safe house feeling like she was about to walk into a firing squad, getting dressed in the conservative navy suit the prosecution team had selected, practicing her breathing exercises while agents checked and rechecked the security protocols for her transport to the courthouse. The drive into LA was surreal, 3 armored SUVs in convoy formation, helicopters overhead, streets blocked off by police, all this protection for one 23-year-old girl who'd seen too much and couldn't unsee it, who'd made choices that had led to this moment and now had to live with whatever came next. The courthouse was a circus, news vans and protesters and Giordano supporters all pressed against police barricades, cameras flashing, people screaming both support and threats, and Lily kept her eyes forward and her face neutral as agents hustled her through a back entrance and into a secured elevator that led directly to the courtroom floor. Walking into that courtroom felt like entering another universe, all wood paneling and fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper and anxiety, rows of seats filled with reporters and FBI agents and members of the public who'd won the lottery for the trial of the century. And there at the defense table sat Vincent Giordano, looking smaller somehow than he had in that factory office, older and almost frail in his expensive suit, but his eyes when they met hers were still sharp, still calculating, still carrying the unspoken threat that even from behind bars he could reach her if he wanted. Marco Salvatore sat next to him, and unlike Vincent he didn't bother hiding his hostility, just stared at Lily with open hatred, like he was memorizing her face for later, and she had to consciously stop herself from shaking as she took her seat in the witness box. The prosecution called her first, and for 2 hours Jennifer Park walked her through her testimony, establishing timeline and credibility, playing the recording of Vincent's confession, painting a picture of a young woman who'd accidentally witnessed a murder and then courageously gathered evidence to bring the perpetrators to justice. Lily answered every question carefully, kept her voice steady, maintained eye contact with the jury like she'd been taught, and tried not to let the defense team's constant objections and theatrical sighs break her concentration. Then came cross-examination, and Vincent's lead attorney, a silver-haired shark named Richard Morrison who'd gotten mob bosses off on technicalities for 30 years, approached the witness stand like a predator circling prey. "Miss Carter," he began, voice smooth as silk, "you testified that you witnessed what you believe to be a murder on the night of October 15th, is that correct?" Lily confirmed it was. "And yet you didn't report this alleged crime to law enforcement until nearly 2 weeks later, didn't alert your own security detail who were tasked with protecting you, didn't tell your father the President of the United States who has access to every investigative resource in the country. Instead you conducted your own amateur investigation with a journalist boyfriend, gathered what you claim is evidence, and only then decided to involve authorities. Does that sound like the behavior of someone who actually witnessed a murder, or does it sound like the behavior of someone constructing a narrative to fit a desired outcome?" Park objected, the judge sustained, but Morrison had planted the seed, and Lily could see some jury members nodding slightly, doubt creeping into their expressions. Morrison continued, methodically picking apart her timeline, questioning why she'd gone to that fundraiser through the back exit, suggesting she'd been meeting someone she didn't want her security detail to know about, implying her entire story was fabricated to cover up her own questionable behavior. He pulled up her social media posts from college, photos of her at protests and rallies, comments she'd made about criminal justice reform and systemic corruption, using them to paint her as politically motivated, as someone who'd invented this entire scenario to help her father's administration go after his enemies. Isn't it true, Miss Carter, that your father has publicly stated his intention to crack down on organized crime in California? Isn't it convenient that you suddenly have evidence against one of the state's most prominent Italian-American businessmen right when your father needs a political win? Park objected again, judge sustained, but the damage was done. Morrison had turned her courage into calculation, her testimony into political theater, and Lily felt her carefully constructed composure starting to crack. Then Morrison made his mistake, got too aggressive, leaned too close to the witness stand and said with barely concealed contempt, "Tell me, Miss Carter, how much of this dramatic story did you and your journalist friend fabricate for the book deal you're no doubt planning? How much of it is real versus how much is designed to maximize your victim narrative for profit?" And something in Lily snapped, something that had been building since that night in the parking garage, since Marco's threats, since Vincent's casual admission of murder, since 6 days in a safe house reliving trauma while lawyers prepared to call her a liar. She leaned forward, looked Morrison straight in the eyes and said in a voice that carried to every corner of that courtroom, "I watched a man die, I listened to his killer threaten my family, I gathered evidence while terrified every second that they'd find out and kill me too, and I came forward knowing it would destroy my life because it was the right thing to do. So don't you dare stand there in your $1,000 suit defending a murderer and suggest I did any of this for attention or money or politics. I did it because your client is a monster who's been operating above the law for decades and someone had to stop him." The courtroom erupted, Morrison objecting, Park trying not to smile, the judge banging his gavel for order, but Lily didn't care anymore, didn't care about strategy or optics or perfect testimony, just cared about the truth finally being spoken out loud where everyone could hear it. The judge called a recess, sent the jury out, gave Lily a stern warning about emotional outbursts, but she could see in his eyes something like respect, like maybe he believed her after all. When they reconvened, Morrison was more careful, kept his distance, focused on technical questions about timelines and evidence chain of custody, but the fire had gone out of his attack, and by the time Lily stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later she felt hollowed out but somehow stronger, like she'd survived something that should have broken her and came out the other side still standing. The preliminary hearing lasted 4 more days, other witnesses testifying, FBI agents presenting evidence, forensic accountants explaining the financial trail, and finally the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, that Vincent Giordano and Marco Salvatore and 15 others would face murder and racketeering charges, that they'd be held without bail given their resources and flight risk. Lily watched Vincent's face as the judge read the ruling, saw something flicker there, not fear exactly but maybe the first hint of understanding that this time he might not walk away, that the empire he'd built might actually crumble. As they led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs he looked at her one last time, and she couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if it was threat or respect or simple acknowledgement that she'd beaten him at his own game. The FBI moved her to a new safe house after the hearing, somewhere even more isolated, explaining that the threat level had escalated now that the Giordanos knew the case was moving forward, that she'd need protection at least until the trial concluded and probably long after. Her father visited that night, brought her favorite takeout from a restaurant in D.C., sat with her on the porch watching the sun set over whatever anonymous dessert they'd stashed her in. "The Attorney General says your testimony was extraordinary," he told her, "says the prosecution team thinks they have better than 80% chance of conviction now, that you gave them everything they needed." Lily nodded, picked at her food, tried to feel something like victory but mostly just felt tired, bone-deep exhausted from carrying this weight for so long. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly, not looking at him. "Destroying my life, putting you through this, all of it, was it worth it?" Her father was quiet for a long moment, then reached over and took her hand, squeezed it gently. "Marcus Webb had a wife and 2 kids, he said. They deserve to know what happened to him, deserve to see justice done, and because of you they will. So yes, Lily, it was worth it even if it doesn't feel that way right now." 3 months later the trial began, and Lily testified again, spent 5 days on that witness stand being cross-examined and attacked and defended, and when it finally ended, when the jury came back after 6 hours of deliberation with guilty verdicts on all major counts, she felt something shift inside her, like a door closing on one version of her life and opening on another. Vincent Giordano got life without parole, Marco Salvatore got 40 years, the organization was dismantled, assets seized, corruption exposed, and it should have felt like triumph, should have felt like vindication, but mostly Lily just felt the absence of fear, the strange lightness of no longer looking over her shoulder, of no longer carrying secrets that could destroy everything. 6 months after the verdict she moved back to LA, got her own apartment in Silver Lake, started working with a victims' rights organization helping people navigate the criminal justice system, and slowly, carefully, rebuilt something that felt almost like a normal life. Danny came by sometimes, they'd get coffee and talk about everything except the trial, and occasionally her father would visit when the presidency allowed, looking proud and sad and grateful all at once. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected sounds, still checked over her shoulder more than normal people did, but she was alive, she was free, and she'd done something that mattered, something that would last long after the fear faded. Late one night she got a text from an unknown number, just 4 words that made her blood run cold for a moment before she realized they weren't a threat. "You did good, kid." And she never found out who sent it, but she liked to imagine it was someone from the FBI, or maybe one of the Giordano organization members who testified against Vincent, or maybe just someone who understood what it cost to stand up when everything screamed to stay down. She saved the message, looked at it sometimes when doubt crept in, when she wondered if the cost had been too high, and it reminded her that some choices transcend calculation, transcend fear, transcend everything except the fundamental question of who you want to be when the universe tests you.